Go ahead and get started.
Great.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. My name is Lauren Bihar, and I'm a Senior Account Executive with Contemporary Staffing Solutions. I've been with the company for 5 years. This is our third webinar of our HR webinar series and is also one that we've all been looking forward to. I think it's pretty safe to say that after 40 plus days of working remotely, we are ready for something fresh and exciting that will help us look forward to life after COVID-19. Due to the fact that our guest, Nick Rosato, is an HR professional in the healthcare space, we'd like to take a moment and thank all of our first responders and healthcare workers. This year has been life-changing for everyone. Before we begin, we'd like to share a quick video from our team here at CSS dedicated to all the healthcare workers. Please take a look.
Hi everyone, my name is Mike Pearson. I'm an owner at Contemporary Staffing Solutions.
Hi everybody, I'm Sharon Sal. I'm one of the owners at Contemporary Staffing.
Hello everybody, I'm Steve Pearson. I'm with Contemporary Staffing Solutions. I'm one of the owners and principals.
I want to thank all the healthcare workers and healthcare systems working around the clock to control this virus, and most importantly for saving thousands of lives around the country every day you go to work. The healthcare workers, in my mind, are the true heroes.
It's the healthcare workers that are truly on the front line, sacrificing themselves and their families and their own mental state. So feeling really blessed and just really want to give a shout out to all the healthcare workers.
I just wanted to reach out to everyone and say we are so thankful for our healthcare first responders and our healthcare workers. What they do for fighting this COVID-19 disease is amazing. That includes the pharmaceutical companies and everyone really who is trying to be in this situation that we're all going to get through. It's a pandemic that we never saw coming, but I have to tell you, I feel very fortunate to be surrounded by the people I'm surrounded by in Contemporary Staffing Solution. It's really put things in perspective, and we look forward to seeing everyone on the other side of this, and we wish everyone the best, and thank you again, the healthcare workers.
Thank you everyone for tuning into our video. For those of you joining, we'll be starting very shortly. If you missed the video thanking healthcare workers, please make sure to check it out in our follow-up email of this webinar. It is just a little after 11, so we'll go ahead and kick things off. Again, my name is Lauren Bihar. I'm a Senior Account Executive with Contemporary Staffing Solutions. Thank you all for joining us. This program will last about 45 minutes. 30 minutes for the presentation, and then a 15-minute Q&A at the end of the program. Please feel free to use the chat feature to submit your questions into the chat box at any time during the webinar, and we'll answer it during our Q&A. Our technical moderator, Nick Life, has muted everyone, so if you're new to Zoom, place your mouse on the top right of your corner. That way you can control your views and go to gallery view. Today's webinar will feature my good friend, Nick Rosato, who has 20 years of experience developing, implementing, and leading the recruiting function. His experience as a practitioner includes corporate and agency settings, where he has leveraged his combined experience within a wide range of industries, including healthcare, to acquire talent to deliver the business needs. He has had the opportunity to manage teams both remote and in person of varying sizes. Before we dive in, we'd like to take a quick poll, asking our audience, what topic is most important to you right now? Recruiting? Remote work, or is it the future of business after COVID-19? Please take a moment to select one of the answers off the poll currently on your screen. While we are collecting your answers, I'd like to introduce Evan Violette, Managing Director of CSS Professional Staffing Group, and our subject matter expert, Nick Rosato. Together, Evan and Nick will discuss the new ways of what it now means to work remote, how to recruit in a pandemic, and what the future looks like in terms of reopening businesses, hiring, jobs, and all of the additional changes we will see. I will pass it to Evan shortly once we have the results. So it looks like most of us out here want to hear more about the future of business after COVID. Yep, I agree. And I'm looking forward to hearing Evan and Nick talk a little further about this topic today. That being said, I'm going to pass it on over to Evan.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Lauren. And thank you so much, Nick, for being here. And a big thank you to all of your peers, Nick, and all of the healthcare workers that you're fortunate enough to work with every single day. My name's Evan Violette. I'm the Managing Director of the Professional Staffing Group at CSS. I lead a team who has supported the hiring of more than 27,000 employees in temporary, contract, and direct hire roles nationwide. We are always upgrading our skills so we can deliver more value to our customers. And today, we are truly working to take this to new heights. The PSG team at Contemporary Staffing truly understands how great talent can make a real difference in human resources, call center and office, and accounting and finance roles. Since 1994, we have been nationally offering professional staffing, both technical and non-technical, along with managed services to our customers. We are extremely grateful for the selflessness of our hospitals and the endless efforts of the food supply and government employees who are helping us stay socially distanced and safe. A little bit over a month ago, Contemporary Staffing started 4 different series of webinars. Our series includes health and wellness, Salesforce tips, sales team webinars, and this one is our HR focus series. Our HR series of webinars is for target audiences that include human resources professionals and talent acquisition leaders who are currently partnering with the C-suite and leading business partners with remote employees who are adjusting to the new way of doing business. So Lauren, thank you so much for introducing Nick. And Lauren, just a special shout out to you for your 5 years with Contemporary Staffing Solutions. We thank you, and you are such a pleasure to work with. So thank you for everything, Lauren. Nick, I'm particularly excited to have you joining us today. And as Lauren shared, Nick has a current background in HR in the healthcare industry. Today, we'll be discussing these 3 areas of the HR world that have entirely changed: remote working, recruiting in a pandemic, and then, per our poll, the most popular topic, what the future looks like in terms of what Nick and myself have been hearing and discussing in the field. So Nick, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, CSS, for inviting me. Lauren, congratulations on your accomplishments as well. I'm really excited to be able to speak to you and to everyone that's here on the webinar. In these challenging times, it's been an eye-opener, I think, for all of us in the HR space, specifically in the talent acquisition space. And before we actually dive into the webinar itself, I thought it'd be pertinent, and I was talking with Evan and Lauren prior, to just draw out some current statistics. These are just things to think about and to dote on, and it will actually fuel some of the conversation that we're going to have. So first and foremost, as I pulled labor statistics, the closest that I can get was pulled on April the 23rd. 26, and I have it written down, 26.5 million Americans have lost their job within the past 5 weeks. And this has actually raised our unemployment to 20% across the country. So it's just a staggering number to even contemplate, to think about how it affects maybe you, how it affects family members, how it affects the people that we're going to recruit and the people that we work with. It's unfounded. So throughout this presentation, you're going to hear some information that I think will really put you in a position to think, and to think a little bit harder and think a little bit faster. And just as a quick comment to that too, should this trend continue, we could be up to 25%, which would push us at a rate that we haven't been even historically close to since the Great Depression. So it's just things that as we come back into society, as things get reintroduced to society, and as we think about as HR practitioners, and then those of us that are specialized in talent acquisition, what that means, it's very powerful. So when we're having those connections, it's just so important to think through. And pulling that even further into the healthcare space, I think is really important. I have these conversations with others, and I see a few of my colleagues that are in the healthcare space. The assumption is that healthcare is doing fine, right? Because there are people that are extremely sick. And in the healthcare space, that's our job, right? We do patient care, we do patient comfort, and we make sure we do everything that we can for the patient. However, some of the challenges that you face in a pandemic is, number one, not being prepared for the surge that is happening. Number two, when you have people that are coming into the space that have COVID symptoms, those are the folks that are staying in the hospitals. So believe it or not, the hospitals are actually suffering just like other businesses. To give quick examples of how that suffering is, you can think about supply and demand. So easy one is food, for instance. Supply and demand, people think about food, but if you translate that into the healthcare space, you can think about PPE. And a great example would be a disposable mask. So a surgical mask that most people went and bought and they put over their face when they're out in public. That mask might have cost 35, 40 cents per mask. Because of the supply and demand, it has increased up to $5 per mask. And it's just a staggering amount of things that are happening. And I continue to look at where this is going and what's happening to the healthcare space and just wonder what that means. A quick point to draw out there is our governor, the PA governor that is, because we do operate in Pennsylvania, as well as other governors and through the government, are looking to lift some of the restrictions of those procedures that have not been happening in the hospital. So think of your elective surgeries. Think of folks that are sick but are not the sickest of the sick, who have been delaying their checkups, who have not been going to their physical therapy appointments, who have not been getting their regular medications and doing those things. Those all have a direct impact. And then also think about the folks that are in the emergency rooms, right? The emergency rooms right now are admittance for COVID versus folks that would normally come through the emergency rooms at this point. So if you think about what's been happening within the American society, there's been a restriction of movement. When you restrict movement, you don't have people active, right? So whether that's active in their communities, participating in sporting events, if you have children or if you're participating yourself, driving, right? Being out in the community was also part of this. And you don't want to equate taking care of a patient to a business, but it is a business. And in order to make sure that we're able to take care of the patients and the sickest of the sick, which happen to be right now part of COVID-19, the acute care that's required is really something that's compressing upon the industry. And I can tell you, just in our space alone, like other healthcare industries and other spots, whether it's a hospital or a hospital system, they are losing quite a few millions upon millions of dollars. So we're looking at that as well. So providing a lot of information and a lot of context, but it is very interesting to think that the healthcare space is actually susceptible to the recourse of this pandemic.
Yeah, Nick, thank you for all of that. And those statistics are staggering. And, you know, I think it's very enlightening to hear because, you know, oftentimes we think, wow, the hospitals must be full. We see, you know, that a lot of major cities are bringing patients into other venues. So, you know, certainly I think we all can agree that this pandemic has left some lasting marks on our society and certainly many, many businesses and industries. Nick, before we get things started, I just want to remind everyone that we'll be using the chat feature for our questions and answers. And we will throw it back to Lauren towards the end of our session today for, you know, asking those questions and fielding some of those answers. So I encourage anyone who has any pertinent questions to please send those out either directly to myself and Lauren or to the entire group. We will certainly look forward to addressing your questions towards the end. So Nick, as we kick things off, remote working has been obviously something that we've all been faced with. And many employers allowed remote working, you know, as needed, but we were all kind of thrown into this. And, you know, I'm not sure that every single company was fully ready to tackle having employees work from home every single day for months on end. So Nick, what do you think remote work looks like present day? and how is the work-life balance changing? And my last question for you, and this is one that really hits home for me, is I have a 2-year-old at home.
Sure.
What are the acceptable balances between being a parent at home, with your children quarantined and still getting your job done?
Sure. I think the concept of remote work is something that is not foreign to folks that are in HR, specifically in talent acquisition, right? It's something that I think we all asked for at some point, but the concept of remote work, I think we have to stop apologizing for simple things like you're talking about, a 2-year-old that's in the house, or the doorbell that rings, or the Amazon delivery person, or the dog that happens to bark, because this is the new way in which we are going to work, whether it's an outcome of the pandemic or whether it's something that will remain within our society and our structure. And having a child on your lap as you're doing a Zoom call, or being able to look past, as I'm doing now, if my office door was to open, because I am working remote, and engage with your children or family members. I mean, that is part of what remote working is, and it's going to be an interesting concept for employers to think about. And I can tell you, my current employer is thinking about it, I'm sure, like others, because the work is still being done. So if the work is still being accomplished and you're not sitting in a structure that you have to congregate in on a daily basis, then do you need that structure? So those are things that I think all of our employers collectively will start to think about and really start to understand what that means. But I think being sensitive to those challenges, right? When you're working remote, and if you're working obviously from home, you have to be the teacher, you have to be the disciplinarian, you have to be the play date organizer, you have to be the technical support as your children are online and they're able to do their Zoom classes or things of that nature, as well as meals and all of those other components that come in. So it is a unique space, and I think one that we're going to continue to learn more about.
Yeah, absolutely, Nick. And it's interesting that you mentioned the dog barking, because I recently saw an article, and 68% of American households own a dog. So, trying to contain that dog bark is something that 68% of households are probably working on. So, would have to agree with you, and that's just the new norm, right?
It is.
And finding the sense of humor in this is so important. So, I know when we've spoken before, Nick, we talk a lot about multitasking and, companies and employees being compassionate about these uncharted waters. From a technical standpoint, it's been really enlightening for me to work with various companies in different industries and just learning about what technology they may be equipped with. Bringing it back to when, many of us entered the workforce, there wasn't a camera attached to every computer,
Right.
So I'm curious to hear from your perspective, especially in the healthcare industry, what type of impacts you're seeing this pandemic having on the technologies that our companies are using.
Sure. I mean, in healthcare in particular, sensitivity around information and data is paramount, right? So when you think about the sensitivity of all of our patient information, if we put ourselves in that position, HIPAA comes to mind and a variety of other things. So being able to pick up a workforce that technically should be anchored within the system was something, candidly, that we weren't prepared for, but we learned very quickly. Let me give you a great example. I mean, for my team members, for the recruitment team, and then broader for HR, not everyone works off a laptop, right? And I know that's not unique just in our space, but think about having to disconnect a desktop with a monitor and bring it home, and the setup and the connectivity. So all of those challenges that were there just faced us really starkly right in the face. And then you think about the technology that we either had or we needed to quickly get due to the remote working. For instance, making sure everyone had availability we use Skype, and we also use Microsoft Teams. So some folks had those accounts but didn't enable those accounts. So they had to make sure that they tested them, much like we did before we joined today, that they could connect with their hiring teams and hiring managers. And most importantly, that they could connect with the candidates in which they're reviewing their backgrounds and presenting for further consideration. So some companies are still trying to figure this out, and they're trying to figure out what this means and what other technologies that they can leverage and use. And the financial impact of that is greater than we can probably ever contemplate.
Nick, that's a really good point with HIPAA. You know, and thinking about that, a lot of our industries, we're not really as affected by that every day as you may be in the healthcare system. So my question is really, how much collaboration are you witnessing between HR and IT? And has that been maybe a silver lining in driving more collaboration between departments that may have not otherwise had to work so closely together?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the needle right on the head, Evan. The opportunity to work even closer with our partners, specifically IT, to enable a remote workforce has just driven that partnership and the opportunity to not only react to what we had to react to, but to think more broader about the future. And again, thinking about what remote working could look like when things start to be reintroduced to the workplace. So the connectivity just in the IT department alone, but other ancillary departments, for instance, like payroll, and for our clinical folks, making sure that they have the needs that they have from a technology standpoint to have the clinical applications. You think of the doctors, for instance, you think of the nurses that are treating the patients, the e-documents that they use. So all of those components were truly brought to the forefront, and you did hit upon those relationships. And they're broader than what we're discussing, but those were very key.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I know leading a remote team, Nick, is something that you and I spoke about quite extensively. I have experience, with managing offices across the country, but, leading a remote team, I'm curious just, talk a little bit, Nick, about the human and digital distractions and some of the obstacles that are coming with working remote. What are you guys trying to do to overcome them and still keep everyone engaged?
Yeah, I think what we're doing right now, which is leveraging that technology and having that interaction, is starting to really catch on, right? So having a conference call, you can log in, you can put yourself on the call, you can put yourself on mute, and then those things just kind of carry on. But we've leveraged those within our space, whether it's in just the HR space or throughout the organization, to continue to build that connectivity and make sure when you have those remote teams, you have those opportunities. So using that information and using that connectivity, believe it or not, has eliminated some of those distractions and made people more corely focused because they know when they're going to meet. They know what the expectations of the meetings are. We're able to share information more readily, whether that is, a PowerPoint, for instance, that's anchoring the discussion, or particular data, or even doing demonstrations via the web of products and tools that we're using. So interestingly enough, leveraging the technology has made the teams more focused rather than less focused and working off of different distractions.
That's great, Nick. And, I know in a previous webinar, we talked a lot about how recruiters can stay engaged. And, we focused heavily on interviews and interview styles and becoming better interviewers, ultimately to attract and hire better talent. So as we move into our second category here, how to recruit in a pandemic, my first question is, Nick, a lot of HR professionals that I've spoken with have shared that they're having issues keeping recruiters engaged.
Sure.
What tips would you share for this?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, right? Because in a pandemic and in a crisis like this, the natural reaction is to shut off the external recruiting function, right? Because we can't bring people in. We need to take care of our own employees. And by the way, that's the right reaction that organizations should be having. But your point is, how do you engage a team? So what I did with working with my team and would suggest others to do, and I'm sure it's not something that people haven't thought of, which is, what projects have we been backburnering that we haven't had the opportunity to do? And I can give you two really core examples of what the team that I'm fortunate enough to lead has been able to really move monumental work. And the first one is one that is not uncommon to anybody else, but our applicant tracking systems. We all know that those can be challenging at best, and they are only as good as what we put in. And we typically don't have the time to put in what we need to extract. So we actually focused on just that piece alone. Job descriptions being one. We're in the middle of doing that project. templates being the other, how we're facing the external public, and do we have a boilerplate? Previously, we did not. We did agree that we needed one. So we're working through those pieces, putting in pre-screening questions so that when we do have applicants apply, we're able to sift through those applicants that are the most meaningful. The second project that we worked on was last month, we were forced not to do an employee orientation. And this employee orientation that we normally do on a monthly basis, we have about 100 people that show up in person. So we quickly scrambled, but forced us to do this actually perfectly, is to put it online, to use a tool that we have in our system, have it be self-paced learning, have all the subject matter experts provide their information, be able to provide knowledge checks and quizzes so that the retention of the information and the welcome would be the same. It's just now being in a virtual environment. So it's forced us to do those things that we knew we should have done and we could have done. We just didn't have the time to do them.
That's great, Nick. And, you know, obviously there's a lot of uncertainty. You know, how should HR leaders decide if to hire and then what positions to hire for? You know, obviously we're seeing a lot of team dynamic change, and COVID has developed new job titles and responsibilities. And, you know, we were wearing multiple hats before, but I'm sure many of us feel like we're wearing even more now. So, you know, to sum up my question, Nick, how should HR leaders decide, number one, if to hire, and number two, what positions to hire?
Yeah, it's a great question. And look, I'll be a little biased as a recruiter at heart, right? Managing a team or not, I still manage my own requisitions. There is never a time that I feel you should turn off the recruiting engine. You should always be courting talent, because if you're not, somebody else is, right? And I recognize what I just stated, because some organizations might have a different opinion with that, and they might think about it differently. But when you think, Evan, about the criticality of where we are in re-entering the workforce, there are positions that are going to be that much more paramount if they weren't already. Those are the first ones that my team is going to focus on, and I would give the suggestion to those participating focus on as well, because they're going to lead the workforce back into, hopefully, what it was, although I don't know what it was or what it could be. But the reopening piece is really where I believe we should focus, because once again, whether it's healthcare, which I sit in, or any other adjacent market, the skills are there, the talent is there, and people want to be engaged. Now it's just a matter of, am I first to the party, second to the party, or unfortunately, am I late to the party?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I know even just here at CSS, we're putting a lot of focus on our digital brand. And, you know, there's a lot of extra time for this collaboration between, hey, what are we putting out there? And digital branding and job postings is so critical. You know, even now when unemployment is as high as you said it was, you know, in the beginning of our session, you know, what would you recommend to companies focusing on digital branding, specifically to their job postings? And Nick, has your team done anything different to try to attract candidates during this time?
Yeah, it's a great question. The social branding component, again, is so critical and important prior to us being in the crisis that we're in. But leveraging the tools that we've had, LinkedIn being one, Glassdoor being another, Indeed being another, and I know I'm mentioning tools that probably everyone that's participating is, you know, shaking their head that they have the same. But those are the chances, again, for us, and we've leveraged those chances to really freshen our approach, to make sure that we're being very strategic. We're looking at lifting off a pilot with an organization called Text Recruit, so we're getting ready to get that together as well. So we're leveraging those components, whether they are older or newer, but really working with the vendors, because they're at a time of crisis as well. And they're actually helping us do a lot of the heavy lifting. So the communications piece, the graphics, the design, and then the reach. And then we can put all of that together, and it's almost essentially, Evan, like a mini rebranding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. And, you know, Nick, you mentioned earlier just the importance of boxing out the competition and continuing to recruit. You know, I'm just curious, what are, in your experience, what are the hospitals predominantly hiring for right now?
Yeah, I mean, look, when you think about prior to, again, this pandemic and the crisis that it caused, there was a grave nursing shortage. So the shortage of nurses is actually increased, rightfully so. But those practitioners that are able to vacillate between different rooms, different departments, as well as, different criticality and acuteness of care are the ones that we'll continue to recruit for and make sure that we have, pipelines or trying to establish pipelines. So those folks that are going in and out of the emergency departments, right, or the ICUs, that either can write scripts or cannot write scripts, but can take the acute patients as they come in, will be so important to the systems that are myself as well as other systems. And then you also think about, once things do kind of resurge, one of the other components will be, and we talked about this briefly, when people start having surgeries again, whether they are elective surgeries or whether they are surgeries that were scheduled, that were canceled, that are, that are something that people want to make sure that they have for their health and well-being. Being able to, because again, it is, the other component is not just the patient care, it is part of a business and economics, is being able to follow the economic trail. Those positions will be that much more critical as well, because the surgeons is going to be in a lot of health systems across the United States that then will be drawing from Federal Reserve, that will be drawing from a variety of other places that are all central to everyone who's in the healthcare space.
Yeah, that's really great points, Nick. And, I think that we talk a lot about just what different industries are hiring for and the available talent. So, I think we have to focus on onboarding as well, right? Hiring the talent now is one thing, but then onboarding. And I see a lot of great activity going on in our chat. And this, I think, was one of the questions that was asked, and we'll certainly go through the rest of them towards the end with the Q&A, but I think it fits perfectly right now to the conversation. So obviously we're still hiring and trying to find talent. Talk to us a little bit about, onboarding in a remote landscape.
Yeah, it's so critical, right? Because again, we're engaging talent at all points. So it just makes that much more of the connectivity so much more important. So whether it is, again, leveraging technology as we're doing here, but before you even get to the technology component, it's about setting expectations. Because once again, as things start to change and the landscape starts to speed for all of us that are in the space, it's going to be pretty fast and furious, and the competition is going to be very steep. So thinking about the personal interaction that you have within the hiring process, how you're able to make sure that you're connecting with your hiring managers, how your hiring managers are connecting with the candidates, how you're leveraging the technology, and how you're communicating effectively, as well as how you're trying to stand out as compared to the competition. What is it about your organization that you can derive parts of the employee value proposition so that when things do change, you're still seen as the employer of choice? So those are all the components that we continue to look at, and I know it's not unique just to our system, but it really is about the why do I come, and then after I'm at the system, why do I stay, right? So those key components, if we can answer them in a recruitment cycle, the likelihood that someone will come and will stay and perform just increases numerically.
Yeah, that's something that we've heard a lot about too. And I was at a roundtable discussion with leaders in our industry, Nick, and one of the pieces of advice that I took away, I think is relevant to digitally onboarding, is we have to recognize it's a lot different for the new hire experience being digital. Spending a full day with the hiring manager in person is different. You can break it up, go to lunch, go grab coffee, change the scenery, as you and I discussed earlier.
Sure.
But one of the points of advice was, bring in as many people as you can so that they're getting different tastes, different experiences and perceptions. And now more than ever, it's really important to tie as many people into the training and onboarding as possible.
Yep.
Because, I think I joke a lot with my team. They may get enough of me pretty quickly, but, in a new hire's perspective, it's really important to pull in as many people as possible. So, Nick, I have one last question before we move to our most popular topic, what the future looks like. And you touched on a couple tools, but obviously in this digital landscape, is there any further insight or specific tools that you may want to just share or possibly name drop to our HR leaders that you guys are leveraging?
Yeah, I think I kind of threw some of them out there, but leveraging the components of recruiting softwares. Again, we're looking at Text Recruit to be able to lift off a pilot. LinkedIn, can't say enough about LinkedIn. Been a power user for years. Working with the folks at LinkedIn directly, they're able to help. Glassdoor and Indeed, if you think about those components of recruitment. And then, using your own internal pieces as well. So we've leveraged more with Microsoft, for instance, as an organization. So we worked back through that partnership that we discussed through our IT folks to make sure we have the accessibility and we have the technology that we can leverage so that we are looked and continue to be able to interact with our candidates, interact with our hiring managers, and try to distinguish ourselves to the best of our ability. So it is kind of looking back. So I'm not really offering anything brand new, Evan, unfortunately, because it's almost a revisit of the products that we've become so extremely familiar with, because they're looking to invigorate and reinvent themselves at this time too.
Mm-hmm.
So I would tell folks that are on the webinar, whoever leads those conversations, it's definitely worthy of revisiting with them if you haven't already, because they're thinking about their business differently and they're recognizing we as HR practitioners are doing our business differently.
Yeah, Nick, that's a really good point, and it's great to hear, because we've recently done very similar work where we've talked with some of our partners, technology partners specifically, about what alternatives can they offer. And like you said, there may not be a new shiny object out there, but there could be ways to bring it back to the basics, maybe focus on the things that we weren't forced to focus on before with some of those tools. And certainly, like you said, a lot of companies are looking to kind of reinvent new opportunities. So that ties perfectly to what the future looks like, Nick. And I know we had a really cool conversation about, just some of the optimism in this situation. So, you've had some really great recommendations in regards to remote working and recruiting in a pandemic. So let's switch it up a little bit before we end our time together and talk to what everyone is curious about. I think the statistics said just about 70% of people here are looking to hear about. We've been noticing that a lot of HR professionals are discussing what life will look like in terms of returning back to the office.
Yeah.
Coming up with a map to this process, Nick, what's some advice that you can give HR professionals as they're considering the return to the office?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that, obviously I'll offer an opinion, right? And it is an opinion. We'll probably get directives as we continue to reintroduce this through government and local officials, and everyone will interpret them in their own space. But just think about it, people coming back into the office. How do you keep social distancing? And when you're back in an office environment, right? When I grew up in the recruiting world, and probably not uncommon to folks that are participating here, you're in a tight space, and you're in a space because you're actually leveraging each other's capability and sharing. So that in and of itself, just physical proximity, is going to be one that HR practitioners have to think about. Is this the opportunity to also think about rotating schedules? Like, we worked on that before we had remote working, where we had kind of like a team A, if you will, and a team B. And team A was in the office 1 week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Team B was Tuesday and Thursday. And then the week after that, they flip-flopped, so that you were able to still have the accomplishment in the office, and you were able to, interact with your peers that you had to, and accomplish some of those things that potentially at the point in time, and we'll revisit them, but had to have a personal interaction. You can have that opportunity. Another piece that we all need to be prepared for is universal masking, right? When we do re-enter into some of the situations that we took for granted before, much like we all do when we go out of our homes. For instance, going shopping or going to pick up food, whether it's from a local restaurant, you need to be wearing a mask, and you need to be very cognizant of covering, and also very cognizant of hygiene. So those things, I think those three, Evan, are going to be the biggest ones that every person, every HR practitioner, every HR team, every organization that's looking to bring people back into the workplace, they can't help but focus on that. They can't help but understand what that means and how they interpret that. And then also with the healthcare space, right? Anyone that's entering a place where there's patient care, you have to go through a screening process. And I know there's other folks that are on as well from different, hospital systems in the area, but you're asked questions, right? You're given a temperature, and then you're actually provided a mask. Even if you have one, you're provided a new one in which that's the one that you are supposed to wear for the entire time that you're in the facility, and it's disposable, so you are to dispose of it and not reuse it. So those components themselves, they are going to be really challenging. But I think, as HR practitioners, one of the beauties of our jobs is we are the instruments of change, and we bring those things to, our organizations and our industry. So I think it's going to actually be a very interesting process that will create some other things that we talked about earlier. Maybe it creates some opportunity for people to focus on that, and maybe not a full-time job, but at least think about crisis management in a different component of reacting to it, but more so preparing for it.
Yeah, I agree, Nick. And just to add to that, I think, so often we look at leadership to be making these decisions and, keeping a close eye out for everyone. But I think it's really important that we recognize we all have individual responsibilities and collective responsibilities. And I've heard a lot of organizations even recommend avoiding, using the kitchen or general common areas as much as possible, just to kind of make sure that there's still some social distancing going on within organizations. And I think back to just in my time within the industry, over the last few years, a lot of companies went to open concept and bullpen style seating. And, I think that you look at those situations and you really recognize that there is going to be individual responsibility on making sure that we're keeping everything sanitized and clean, and open communication and transparency, is the other thing too. I think having the time to mentally prepare for that is so critical. So, Nick, that's a really great point. And, as we talk more about the future, I think there's a lot of things to focus on in terms of job development. And I'm curious to gather your opinion on whether or not, or what you think in regards to new job development and a flood of new types of positions coming to the market potentially in a post-COVID world.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of alluded to that in my response to you there, but I think the emergency preparedness, kind of crisis management, it has to come to the forefront, because that's really where we are. And I think those positions, although they exist, infection prevention is another one that's very prevalent in the healthcare space. I think they're going to take on a whole new world of responsibility. So I would see those as definitely coming out of this crisis and this pandemic that we currently find ourselves faced with. I also think there's going to be a health and wellness component, right? Again, that's my opinion, but you basically took the entire, the world at this point, but we'll focus more locally. You took the entire population of America and forced them to be relatively sedentary. And I don't mean just sitting in space, but you limited interaction. So I think that's going to be a huge component of being able to not only work with adults, but also work with children, right? Because they're developing different habits, because they're learning differently, they're focusing differently. So I think getting, some more of that component is going to be a big piece. And then lastly, I think, again, I alluded to it, but to pull it apart here is the support that's going to be necessary for all of these folks that are going to be re-entering the workforce, and when they're re-entering the workforce, and how they're going to be compensated, how the organization's going to receive credits for their compensation. So the stream that's going to follow along the financial impact, I think, is one that we're going to have to prepare for. I don't know if that means that we're going to need, for instance, accountants or things of that nature, because I don't have that crystal ball. I don't think any of us do. But I think the support of being able to understand when things do get reintroduced, what that could mean economically, I think is going to be one of those things that we should all think out loud about, and think about the folks that are on our current teams more so, and make sure that we're engaging with them so that we don't lose any of those folks to other organizations that might be looking at potentially starting like a new revenue cycle, for instance, in my space. shop, or they're thinking about going completely remote where other organizations might be in the office. So those things, Evan, I think are going to be just that much more critical for us to think about.
For sure. And Nick, that kind of brings me to my next question about working remote. And, as we said before, almost every company was forced to just go remote. Almost it felt like overnight.
Yep.
So let's focus on the employee side of this now. There's no longer the unnecessary commute or, sitting in traffic to get to work or to get home. What do you think the impact is going to be with this experience, almost forced experience of working remote? Do you think this will lead to more remote jobs down the road? Do you think that remote work will become a competitive advantage, like you said, if companies can offer it? What are your thoughts?
I do think it might become considered more of a competitive advantage because it's the reality in which we live right now, right? I think remote working accommodations, and I'll use that term loosely, I'll kind of do the air quotes, right? Accommodations, were more of a, at least it seemed, were more of a point that you would discuss in like an offer, right? Because, hey, I wanted to be able to be flexible with my family situation or the like, where I think we're going to find that that's going to be more prevalent. And those opportunities to do so, I think organizations need to think about the impact. One of the reasons to think about the impact is productivity. You mentioned a great point. A lot of people commute, and their commutes can be varying distances and varying time frames, whether they're doing it themselves, public transportation, whatever they're relying on to get there. They're not productive times, right? But they're considered part of the actual work day. So if my consideration is that, hey, I could work remote, and when I want to work, I'm on, and when I'm off, versus the traditional way of, I have an hour commute, I have to spend 15 minutes to park in a garage downtown and then get to where I need to be, and 15 minutes to get my car out, and an hour in traffic when it's normal. Those things are going to be very prevalent. So yeah, we should think about those and prepare for those. And again, the other piece that I know other organizations are thinking about, much like mine, is the economical situation of we're getting people to be very productive in an environment that we're not paying for, right? So we're not paying rent. We're not paying any other bills or utilities. Is this a better opportunity to not only engage our workforce, but to have our workforce become that much more productive? So I think organizations, they have to look at it. And I believe that we will see some dramatic shifts.
Yeah, it is, a lot of, like you said, the crystal ball, but I think we need to focus on, there has been a case study in front of all of us. And, we've talked in previous sessions that the people that are doing their job and doing it well are being recognized. But on the flip side, the people that, maybe are not, and they're not stepping up to the plate, that's also being recognized.
It is.
And from an employee perspective, you have to look at, maybe this isn't the right job. Is there something more that I want? Because I think we all can recognize when you feel good, you really do work your best. So,
yeah, you do.
Nick, we're going to leave some time to get to the questions and answers.
Sure.
And I know we've got a lot of action going on in our chat box. So I thank you for those who have already participated, and encourage anyone who hasn't to please throw out your questions. We've got some time to move in that direction. But before I throw it to Lauren for the questions and answers, Nick, I just want to thank you. And again, on behalf of our entire team at CSS, thank you to all the healthcare workers. We oftentimes work in healthcare at CSS, placing medical billers, coders, medical receptionists. And, we recognize that even in the best of times, working in a medical profession, you're at risk. But right now, we can't thank you enough. And thank you for all your insight, Nick.
No, not a problem. Not a problem in the least bit. I can't thank you enough for the opportunity, and very engaging. And I'm looking at some of the chat comments from Zoom. I see some folks that are from Jefferson and others, and what they were commenting on. So it's really good to see this engaging community here.
Thank you, Evan and Nick. Just funny thought as we're kind of talking about this work-life balance. I'm actually planning an upcoming PTO, and I was even thinking, well, what do I put in my out of office? My home is my office. It's also my classroom to my kids. And just, again, one of these new norms that just kind of gets us thinking about everything. So thank you both again. Yep. We do have a lot of activity in the chat. So Nick, a question that seems to be getting a lot of buzz going is, what should a company do when the culture is one of the key selling points to attracting and retaining talent? If we're not in the office, how can that culture sell continue? Any recommendations?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, right? Because that's really what we're talking about, the employee value proposition and a competitive advantage. So not being in the office, I don't think limits you to be able to discuss what the culture's like. I mean, engage those people that are ambassadors of your culture, right? So leverage the technology and pull in folks that can qualify and even quantify that culture either that you have or that culture that you're trying to build. So I think about most recently had a pretty senior clinical position in which I involved the CEO and COO into the interviews. And it actually closed the interview. And it closed it in such a way that we're going to extend the offer, and we feel relatively confident that we'll be able to get the person in that we want. So that's just one example of how to constantly think outside and maybe to the question of how to pivot. So think internally about who can be an ambassador of the culture that you want to be able to project, and that you also want to be able to qualify and quantify. And then moreover, in that example that I gave, and we're working on this as well, how do we make that available to everybody? So how do we find those recommendations and put that information on LinkedIn again, Glassdoor, Indeed? Think about the outlets that your organization has. And I think that might be the best way to start, not only in the social space, but then internalize it and make it personal. Most of the time as recruitment practitioners and professionals in HR, much like others, we make it very personal. So when you bring that personal interaction and you can embody that culture, it's very transparent and it transfers over to the experience in the applicant.
And Lauren, I would just add to that the importance of social media to exemplify the culture. And, you know, we see a lot of companies putting up pictures of, you know, people with their families, as similar to our video, thanking the healthcare workers or,
Right.
you know, doing things of that nature. So focusing on the importance of social media in the marketing teams would be something that I would add to that too.
Evan, a question for you. How are companies finding temp employees during this pandemic and selling them on a temporary opportunity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, you know, I think that one of the biggest things, like Nick says, is it's all about being personal. Certainly right now with unemployment where it is, people are looking for any sense of stability. But it's a great opportunity for candidates or job seekers to maybe dip their feet in a new industry. You know, transferable skills is something that our recruiters are talking about more than ever. You know, on the flip side, the clients that are using us for temporary placements right now are, I would say, you know, commendably more flexible than ever before. You know, working remotely, you know, providing flexible hours, flexible schedules, increasing pay. You know, I think that these are just some of the things that you have to take a more personalized approach, find out what was missing in the person's last job. You know, if they could paint the picture of the perfect job, you know, start there. Because let's face it, as companies continue to start hiring again, placing someone in a role is not the end scenario. It's keeping them in the role. So it's really focusing on what are they looking for. And as one of our participants, you know, mentioned, culture is key, and that is definitely a big part of it. But you know, challenges, career growth, career pathing, and transferable skills is really how we're able to help candidates find the right match, particularly in the temporary space right now.
We have time for about one more. So as we're talking about bringing on new employees, how do you alter your training plan as we're starting new hires remotely?
Question for me, or Evan, or both?
Nick, or yeah, Nick, you want to take that
Okay.
one, or
Yeah,
Evan, or maybe?
I'm sure we can both dive in really quickly. So as you think about, you know, what this means, it is flexibility, right? It is the opportunity to think about it differently and provide an experience, and also get the feedback on the experience, and make sure that you're continually refining it and looking at it as an opportunity. But I think welcoming it first and foremost is the easiest way to be able to accomplish it. And then leveraging the tools that you have, and if we don't have those tools, to go grab those tools. And I offered, again, the orientation that we finally, I feel like, stepped into the right century, candidly, and provided a self-paced learning for a typical 100-person in-person event. And we would still use that, but being able to do that, I think, is a great opportunity. So, Evan, I'll push it to you to give some more comments as it relates
Yeah.
to your business.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Nick. I think, technology is unavoidable, and focusing on that now is so important. I'll give an example. We just had a company-wide Zoom training just a few weeks ago, and many of us on it felt we were pretty comfortable with how to utilize Zoom and Microsoft Teams. But, having that training and bringing it back to the basics takes two things. It's the acceptance of the employees on being trained and the understanding of, this is unavoidable. We have to become better with technology. And then it's also the recognition of the company that that's time well spent. So I would only add, Nick, I think you summed it up perfectly, just that technology is truly unavoidable.
Mm-hmm.
And many of us, myself included, like to joke that we're not the most tech savvy, but we are really moving to a digital world. And
Yep.
I know it sounds cliche, but right now we're being forced to play with the technology. So taking the time to make sure that everyone's comfortable with it, is super important. And then as a corporate, making sure that everything is secure. As Nick mentioned earlier, the healthcare space is so important, but every company's network and security is also very important too.
Yeah. And Evan, you just hit a point, if I can, Lauren, just to pull it apart. I think the other piece is, because it's so prevalent, Evan, I think the assumption is everybody knows how to use it, right? And that's a bad assumption, because just getting on and being able to interact with one person isn't leveraging all of the technology that you could, and all of the components, as Nick showed us, being able to do polls, right? Something that simple. So I think those components as well is just getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, and uncomfortable being comfortable.
I personally can speak to that. Learning a lot. That's awesome. Thank you both. If there are any additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us.
My pleasure.
Just for time's sake. But this has been just so informative, and we thank everybody again for joining. And I just want to take a minute to explain and reiterate that CSS is launching HR webinars, and we'll be showcasing various subject matter experts that are aimed at helping the HR leaders navigate through uncharted waters. If you are passionate about HR and want to be included in our series, reach out to any of us here at CSS, or you can reply to the follow-up email you will receive from our marketing team. We're happy to share that we do have an upcoming webinar. Our CSS Tech Services Business Unit will be hosting a webinar this Thursday on Salesforce tips and tricks. Salesforce Solution Engineer Cheryl Morrison will demonstrate Salesforce tips and tricks that she uses when she has limited access to development support. Cheryl will review Google and Microsoft Word tips for admin documentation and Agile Accelerator for project management. If you or any of your colleagues are interested in joining, please sign up using the link that should be in our chat feature right now. Otherwise, we will be sending a link in our thank you. A recording of this webinar will also be posted on our website and emailed out to all of you along with the slide deck shared today. Contact information for both Nick and Evan will be included, and follow-up information. Thanks again so much for your time today, and please stay healthy and safe.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.